Welcome to the AGA podcast, where we bring you small talk on big topics from within the world of gastroenterology. Thanks for being with us. Now let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the AGA podcast, Small Talk, Big Topics. I am one of your hosts, Matthew Whitson, and with me today is one of our new co-hosts, Dr. Catherine Schmidt. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am great. I'm excited to be here today and hear from our guests on this exciting topic.
Nice. So we're going to talk about collaboration today. Now, you are still in training, correct? You are early in your career here.
Very early. I am a second-year GI fellow currently at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota.
So what are you looking forward to hearing from our guests about collaboration? So as you're thinking about your future career, what do you really want to learn from them?
Yeah, I'm super excited to hear about successful collaborations they've had and maybe something that has been really cool or exciting for them that's come from their collaborations and what has made their particular project so effective and memorable. And then I'm also curious as to how their collaborations have changed over time from the time of being a fellow to where they are in their careers now and how it's changed in how they've reached out to people or maybe developed those collaborations, whether it's within their institution or across multiple institutions or with outside partners, those types of things.
I'm always curious about when I see 11 co-authors from 10 different institutions, really, how does that group get together? And usually you look around and you're like, oh, those are some heavy hitters. And I get how that happens on clinical trials. That makes sense. But I think as we think about other avenues of research, I think it's got to be a talent and a skill to develop those collaborations and really make them work. So I am curious to hear from both of them about those topics, as well as just kind of what do you do as a younger faculty member, right? So they're both a few years into their careers, at least, and quite successful careers. So what about those new people out there? What do they do?
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be very interesting to hear from a fellow perspective. I think a lot of fellows will be interested to hear about how they can reach out to people who are successful, like our guests that are coming on.
So why don't we introduce our guests right now? So our first guest is going to be Dr. Rachel Issaka. She is a gastroenterologist, an associate professor, and the Catherine Surra Smith Endowed Chair in Health Equity Research at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center at the University of Washington. I mean, she is just an overall powerhouse researcher in the colorectal cancer space as well. Who's our second guest today?
Our second guest is Dr. Loren Rabinowitz, who is an instructor in medicine at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and Harvard Medical School, and an attending physician in the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Center at BIDMC. Her clinical research is focused on the intersection of inflammatory bowel disease as well as women's health.
Yeah, so they do a little bit different things, but they both have really been producing first-rate scholarly work. Really enjoy reading their stuff when it's published. So I am looking forward to hearing what they have to say.
Yes, me as well. I feel like they're both such big leaders in the field who I look up to. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to say today.
All right, so let's get into it. This is our conversation with Dr. Rabinowitz and Dr. Issaka. Loren, do you mind introducing who you are, what you do?
I'm Loren Rabinowitz, and I work in the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Center at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. My research is focused on the intersection of IBD and women's health. And I also do research in gender equity in medicine, specifically in gastroenterology.
Awesome. And Rachel, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Rachel Issaka. I'm an associate professor, a gastroenterologist, director of the colon cancer screening program, as well as a researcher whose work focuses on improving colon cancer screening, improving health equity, and implementing interventions to affect both of those issues.
Awesome. So on behalf of Catherine and I, we're just thrilled you guys are here today. And really the topic we're going to be talking about is about collaborations, largely in like scholarly pursuit realms. Could you both just speak to what's the team you work with? Who are they? Is it just MDs? Is it actually community members? What is that team and what do those collaborators look like for both of your individual projects or areas of research, rather?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'm happy to report that depending on the nature of the project, we like to try to involve as many stakeholders as possible. So a lot of my work in IBD is really focused on patient-reported outcomes, and you can't do that unless you have patient voices. And so whenever we're using some sort of an instrument or collecting survey data, we really try to get active feedback from our patients. We're lucky enough in our IBD center to actually have several providers as patients, which is also a really unique perspective to actually have the lived experience of having whatever condition it is that you're actually helping to other people to manage. But particular to IBD, but maybe not particular to IBD, our clinical atmosphere is very multidisciplinary. So we try to replicate that piece also on the research side. I'm really lucky to work closely with one of my colleagues who's actually trained as a GI psychologist, Dr. Sarah Ballou, who is an amazing researcher and collaborator, but brings a totally different way of looking at research, especially patient-oriented outcomes research, and has a totally different background and training than we do as physicians. But I think that patient perspective is really, really important. And then sort of on the gender equity side of things, we're always trying to think about ways that we can make the workforce more equitable for all of us, right? Because that's the best way we can figure out to take care of ourselves and then also to take care of our patients. Same thing, it's hard to talk about disparities in clinical medicine or disparities in the workforce if you don't actually have representation. So when I'm doing collaborative projects in that area, I really try to make the authorship or the collaborator space mirror the people we're actually trying to hopefully help.
I love that you mentioned the importance of the patients across the different types of work that you do, Lauren. I couldn't agree more. And I would say similarly, my teams tend to be very multidisciplinary. So I sit as part of a research group called the Hutchinson Institute of Cancer Outcomes Research. And within this group, we have behavioral scientists, we have PhD biostatisticians, modelers, we have clinicians. And so really being able to bring all of those unique lenses to the questions that we ask ultimately, I think, pushes us all to be better scientists and to come up with better solutions to help our patients. In my other roles, including as director of the colon cancer screening program, I have the pleasure of working with people who are on the clinical operations side of things, including the director of population health and our health navigators, who I would say are probably the most important people on the team, as they're the ones who are directly interfacing with patients. As the director of the colon cancer screening program, we also are heavily involved in community engagement, and that involves people who have been diagnosed with colon cancer or have been affected because of a relative or someone else they know who's been diagnosed with and dealing with this disease. And I would say, similarly, Lauren, one common thread throughout all the work that we do is that we do try to make sure that the patient voice is represented. So whether it's directly in community engagement, whether it's through a community advisory board that's affecting or advising our research, we really want to try and center those voices, but bringing these multidisciplinary lenses to the questions that we ask.
So one of the things that's really incredible about your work, Rachel, is exactly what you're mentioning, that ability to sort of bring all the stakeholders to the research. And I'm really interested in how we can sort of sensitively and appropriately include patient voices that traditionally haven't gotten the chance to be heard. I'm specifically interested in a project we're looking at now where we're trying to study issues that are particularly important for patients who identify as members of sexual or gender minority groups or LGBTQIA+ patients. And I just wondered, do you have any advice for how you approach bringing the patient into the research project?
Yeah, so I would say that the relationship starts way before the research ever begins. And many of the relationships we've cultivated with patients, with community members, honestly started because we wanted to know what they needed. So there were long periods of times during which we did not ask patients to advise on research projects at all. We simply asked them, what do you need? And if they told us, for example, that they needed to learn more about colon cancer, then we asked, what does that look like for you? And they kind of helped inform how we created those resources for them in the communities in which that they lived. And so in cultivating those relationships over time, we were then able to approach people and say, hey, now we are doing this research study on XYZ topic, and it would be really awesome if you could join us and participate. And in those instances, because we had cultivated these relationships, they would often say yes. I recognize that more and more research funders are asking for the voice of community advisory boards or advocates or survivors or whatever it may be. And I think in those instances, it's a good thing but it's challenging to develop and cultivate new relationships and bring those voices at the same time. So I would say in an instance like that, the latter, where I'm describing the research is sort of necessitating the voice, whereas relationships may not already exist. In those cases, I think it's really best to tap into existing networks. And that is leveraging relationships of people who you know and who you trust. So, for example, when it comes to colon cancer, there are patient advocacy groups like Fight CRC that already have established community advisory boards. And because they're already plugged in with an organization, it's easier for an investigator to reach out to them and ask, can your board participate in our work? And they have a process of doing that. And in many ways, the relationship has been built by the nonprofit organization already. And so they will let you know as an investigator what you need in order to be able to access that network, if that makes sense. There may be other opportunities locally, for example, through your institution's Office of Community Outreach and Engagement, where they've already done that work in building the relationship, and therefore you as an investigator can tap into that network. But I try to advise researchers from trying to establish relationship at the same time that they know they will be needing something for a research project, because I don't think that those interactions necessarily always go well for both parties.
Is that because the patients or in this case, a slightly more vulnerable population can feel it's a little disingenuous, like there's an ulterior motive? Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly, because people don't like the feeling of being approached only because institutions need something. And academic institutions in particular, have a long history of being, untrustworthy, right? And so even though you are new and you are being thoughtful in your approach, there may be ongoing unresolved feelings from somebody else who might have been at your institution or somebody else who might have been engaged with academia that they felt left them high and dry or did not really have their best interest at heart. So I think it's really important to keep that perspective in mind when trying to cultivate or establish these new bridges.
I think, Rachel, just to build on that for 1 second, going back to a point you made earlier, where when you were listing your collaborators, you list, other team members, but you also mentioned hospital leadership members. And I think, I assume that's tying into this as well, right? Like those people that have been there a little bit more for some scholarly pursuit to be successful, they know the history a little bit, right? So they may be able to give you a little inroads as to what's been going on, actually help you know where the resources are, but really also kind of give you those heads up to those moments.
That's exactly right.
And populations that have been excluded from research for years and years and years, understandably, would be very wary of people coming there, even if the intentions are really pure and wonderful.
Yeah. So I do think that there are groups that want to be actively involved in research, but the ask matters as much as who the ask is coming from. And oftentimes, if you don't already have relationship with those entities, finding those people that have relationship with those groups is really the most effective way to make the ask. And then that way there's sort of a vetting process. Well, Dr. Rabinowitz is approaching me through XYZ and I know XYZ. And so if they say that, what she is doing is sound, then I trust that, right? And then they're willing to move forward and work together in that capacity.
And I think also, I totally agree with everything you're sort of highlighting. But I also think that one-on-one in the room with the patient interaction is super important. One of the things I say to my patients whenever we're talking about a research study is we cannot learn how to do a better job taking care of patients if we never ask our patients how we can do a better job. If we don't ever ask, where are the gaps? Like, what's the hardest part of your disease process or your day as you're navigating? We can think we understand what the problems are for our patients, but we might be totally off. And I feel like that sort of line that we need your buy-in, but we also really need your expertise and lived experience tends to be pretty effective in getting patients excited about the work that we're doing. Also, I heard a fantastic talk by Dr. Steve Friedman, who directs our Pancreas Center at BIDMC. And he actually will wear a button in his clinic that says, "Ask me about my research," which I thought was so brilliant because it then actually kind of opens the door to those conversations, but allows the patient to generate the ask or the question. and doesn't put the researcher or physician in the position of necessarily needing to ask or feel uncomfortable about presenting the work that they're doing. So I loved that because it sort of opens that door and has generated, it sounds like, some really, really interesting and generative discussions with patients about the kind of research that one can be engaged in.
I love that you guys are both bringing up like the importance of the patient voice and challenges that have been coming up sort of as you're talking about some of the collaborations you've been engaged in. I'm just kind of curious what other challenges you have maybe encountered as you collaborate, whether it's within your institution or outside or with patients or leadership. And then on the other end of the spectrum after, I would love to hear about what has been really successful for you or exciting or something really cool that's come out of your projects.
So you asked about a challenge and then a success story. So I'm not going to answer your question because that's what we do, right? Okay. So I'll answer a different question, but related.
This is not a political podcast.
Yeah, right.
We can get at the issues.
Well, I was just going to add that one thing that has been really successful in the work that we've done is just acknowledging individuals' time contributions to the work that we do. So whether it's an interview participant, if they're a physician or if they're a patient, for example, there are many studies that will pay physicians more than patients. And in all of our studies, we pay patient participants the exact same amount because we acknowledge that everybody's time is important and their time is valuable. And we try to, as much as possible, with all of our collaborators, if we're writing grants, including a dollar commitment that mirrors the time investment that they're making in the work that we're doing. And I think even if it's not a substantial amount, the effort that goes into that is really appreciated, I've observed, amongst our collaborators. And I really encourage folks who are in research to always think about that and understand that time is a non-renewable resource. And anybody who's investing that in you deserves for that to be acknowledged. Often that's monetary, but certainly in other ways as well. And that can include co-authorships on manuscripts. Whenever I'm invited to speak on something, if I believe that one of my collaborators would be a better person, I offer them that opportunity to amplify their voice and their perspective. So just really being mindful of the time contributions that people are making in the work and then honoring that.
Yeah, I think I had such an immediate answer for what can be challenging, which is the IRBs. It's such a double-edged sword because you totally understand that they are there in order to protect the patient. And that is such a valuable space to be in. And I don't envy that work and how fastidious they have to be about making sure that things are done according to procedure to the benefit of the patient and patient protection. I will say that when you're collaborating with other institutions, starting the process from an IRB perspective as quickly as possible is invaluable because time is of the essence. And I always tell my mentees, if you had a great idea, someone else probably also had it. So once you have a great idea, pushing it over the finish line as quickly as you can is a good idea so that you don't lose the opportunity to explore and publish in that space. But sometimes you can get a little bit waylaid by waiting for other institutions to be able to collaborate with you, et cetera. And so bringing your collaborating team on really early and giving people the opportunity to serve as stakeholders early in the process is also really valuable from a timing perspective and an IRB perspective. And it also allows you to course correct early on. And I think one of the things that I'm always interested in, because I was an athlete before I was a doctor, is the idea that collaborators are kind of like your team members, they're teammates. And you can learn so much from people, especially if they have different areas of expertise or they play a different position. And so I love getting that team together and having everybody put their heads together and really be able to put together an end product, i.e. the publication that reflects the best of all of the members of the team. And it's harder to do that when you're collaborating with people at a later stage. The flip side of that is that you can also die by committee. If you have so many stakeholders on really early in the inception of an idea, it can slow things down too, because someone ultimately has to make a decision about when we're done. When the demographic table is done, it's done. We got to move on to the next thing. Or when the survey instrument is done, it's got to be done. And we can keep perfecting it for 6 years, but sometimes we just need to move the project forward too. So there's always that sweet spot of pulling in collaborators and getting other institutions, IRBs, et cetera, onboarded early, and also having enough of a momentum behind you so that you don't sort of get waylaid and bogged down really early on in a project.
I have a follow-up question for you, if you don't mind then. You mentioned it can be challenging, but also great to work with collaborators from other institutions. And as a fellow, I'm always curious, I'll be reading a paper, even one of yours, for example, and I'll see someone I recognize on there from, across the country, another institution, and I get excited. But then I'm thinking like, oh, how did this come about? Like, how did this start? Yeah, so I guess my question is, how do you identify and establish your collaborations for your research projects and pick that best team, pick those individual members who are going to serve you well for this collaboration? I always find that like very interesting.
I think a lot of my collaborations have happened very organically, where one person might pose a question and then you sort of think about who has published in this space or proximate to the space, and you think, oh, let me reach out to them because they might have some valuable insight on this question that I have in mind. And then that then leads to like a snowball effect, because then they might have a trainee that they want to have become involved in this work. And then you might have a trainee that you want to then bring on to teach certain skills. And then at some point you decide this is the size at which we can work efficiently and work effectively and not get bogged down by trying to coordinate meetings in different time zones. And then you run with that. So that's one experience that I've had with how these collaborative groups come together. I've also had the opportunity to work with collaborative groups that already exist. So as an example, Prosper, which is a big cross-country institute that was funded by the National Cancer Institute to really help study cancer screenings from multiple healthcare settings. And they have data from safety net healthcare centers as well as integrated healthcare centers. So this institute already exists, right? And my institution happens to house the coordinating center that's managing all of the data that's coming in from these groups across the country. And so there was a question I had in mind, and I asked somebody who was associated with this group because I knew that this was one potential data asset that was equipped to answer this question. And then I was invited to ask the question of the group and go through their formal process of submitting the proposal to then get access to the data, to write the paper associated with that. So because that collaborative group already exists, when I write that paper, all of those people who are contributing primary data are now co-authors on that work. So those are my experiences around building some of these collaborative groups. Loren, I'm curious about yours because you've published some great work with really cross-national collaborations as well.
Yeah, I totally echo what you're saying, which is a lot of it happens organically where you'll find like-minded people or people who really get so excited about similar topics. And I also think that part of it is, I hope I embody this, or at least I really try to, being a really good collaborator yourself. Again, I hate to bring it back to being an athlete again, but just the idea of coachability is really pretty powerful. You want to be the kind of collaborator that you want, somebody who's excited about the work and helping you along in the process and is responsible and meets deadlines to the best of your ability. And I think that when you show yourself to be a really phenomenal contributor, that snowballs also, because then for the next project, somebody says like, oh, it was such a pleasure. It was so much fun to work with him. Or I had such a great time interfacing with this person and they have this really cool, unique lens. And then you end up collaborating on multiple projects, which I think is such a pleasure. I also think that this is something that I really try to drive home to my trainees, which is that you don't have to wait to be super senior to be a really great collaborator. It takes a little bit of bravery. I've had to cold email some really major people, and I'm always shocked and very grateful when anyone responds to a cold email. But I think, again, like many of us who are in similar spaces get excited about projects that are good ideas and want to get involved. And so having a little bit of bravery, like reaching out to someone who's doing some interesting work, even if they're not in your institution, particularly as a trainee or junior faculty member, don't immediately assume that they will not want anything to do with you and can't possibly give you any of their time because they're division chief and how could they that's actually not valuable. Just send the email. I've learned that sometimes someone will actually be really interested, and not only that initial email or that initial collaboration can help open doors moving forward as well. Right? We talk a lot about mentorship and sponsorship and what sponsorship really means, and it just means that you're actively creating opportunity for other people. It doesn't matter whether they're a co-resident or a co-fellow or another junior faculty member, or there's somebody who's now a division chief somewhere. And I think that, again, that idea that you be the collaborator you would love to have yourself is something really important and something that doesn't require any seniority. All of us can be great collaborators.
I know that this is going to come out during DDW, so I just want to make a plug that DDW is actually a great place for people to begin to build these collaborations. I've lost count of the number of people I approached because I thought the work they were presenting in a poster session or in a research forum was interesting. And then I would say the next step after that is to follow up with those people after the meeting is over, because it just presents an opportunity to continue to build your own portfolio, to learn from somebody who's doing this work that's been published. And DDW can be a very intimidating place because of how large it is. But I've always found that if I can hone in every day on one or two posters or one or two talks that are of interest to me that I believe might be able to extend my work or that I could potentially partner with this person, then I kind of use that as the way that I structure my day. And I found that to be a really great way to spend time at that meeting.
I love that. I think that's such good advice because those meetings can be so overwhelming that it's hard to know how to best approach someone. So I love what you said. And then likewise, Lauren, what you said about being excited and just sending that email. I feel like I need to write some of this advice down and remind myself and remember it because it is such good advice for fellows and physicians early in training, just to get over that fear of what are they going to think of me, or, if it's not a good idea, and just, send it. There's not much harm in that. And it could turn into a really neat collaboration. So I think that advice you guys both gave is great.
I appreciate that both you explicitly or implicitly talked a lot about sponsorship. Rachel, you mentioned having a collaborator give a grand round somewhere if they're the expert, or letting their voice be heard and not always being the senior author. And Lauren, you talked about the role for sponsorship, which is, I don't think we have to belabor it, really been proven to be the most effective way to really promote our female colleagues and our URM colleagues as well. And it's been really shown time and time again that that's very, very helpful for our chiefs and our program directors and our peers to be doing this. I am curious, and Lauren, you started getting to this. I'm going to go ahead and argue that both of you are well established at this point, that when your email comes across someone's desk about a potential collaboration, or when you guys are hanging out at DDW at the podium afterward, that person is just really pumped to be talking to you guys as a potential collaborator. And so, Lauren, you started giving some advice to maybe junior members, but I am curious if you guys have explicit advice for very young trainees, like last year trainee, first year faculty that are starting to look to develop a collaboration with others. Are there specific things that you did your first 1 or 2 years, advice that you give to your mentees at this point, that where their name may not always open the door yet, but it will one day?
One thing that my mentor, I've had many mentors, but my fellowship mentor explicitly, Dr. Ma Samsuk, who is at UCSF, I always appreciated Ma doing this for me, and I try to do this now for my trainees, but especially at these large meetings, Ma would walk around with me and he would introduce me to people. He would say, have you met my fellow, Dr. Issaka? This is her work. This is what she's presenting. DDW, her poster's on Sunday at 12:30. You should stop by. So I try to do this now for my trainees, but I think that was very valuable. And I remember even when I started to look for jobs, he would email people on my behalf and let them know that I was starting to look for, employment opportunities, and if they had things in their division or department to keep me in mind. So I think especially, yes, when you're earlier on and you don't know anyone, there is definitely use to going up and introducing yourself. But if you can also have someone who maybe it's a mentor in research or a clinical mentor, life mentor, whomever it may be, who may know other people, walk with them and have them introduce you to people. Tell them the things that you're interested in. They might be able to make connections for you.
That's great advice.
Rachel, I really loved what you said about your intentionality at DDW. I will say, as a person who's naturally a little bit more introverted, I find that being in huge groups of people, unless I have a good game plan in place, can sometimes feel a little bit intimidating. And I remember my first DDW as a second year resident really feeling overwhelmed. And that is such great advice that if you are a little bit strategic about who you're interested in meeting or scanning who's going to be there and what the talks are so that you can sort of more closely target the people you might think about reaching out to, it can make a really, really big meeting like DDW, which is such an incredible, exciting, but sometimes overwhelming place to be, feel a little bit more manageable, or sometimes even reaching out to people in advance of a meeting and saying, hey, if you're going to be at DDW, is there any chance I might be able to grab you for coffee for 15 minutes? And so you have a little bit more of a regimentation and a plan for who you're going to connect with. And a lot of this ends up being organic anyway, right? Because you go and have coffee with that person and you're next in line to somebody else and you start having that conversation and it spawns a whole beautiful collaboration. But I really love what you said about sort of that intentionality. And also, again, having the bravery that you deserve to be there, right? Like one of the wonderful things about gastroenterology, and one of the reasons I wanted to be a gastroenterologist and really love being a gastroenterologist, is we're a really nice bunch. At the end of the day, we're poop doctors. Like, we don't take ourselves that seriously. It's fun to go to these meetings, you know? And I can't think of that many times where I went up to somebody and they were anything other than kind and gracious and excited to talk with me about what I was interested in. So if you're already interested in gastroenterology or you're already a gastroenterologist, you've already done 85% of the work because you picked the right place to be. We're a really nice bunch. And having the confidence in yourself that like you deserve to be there and you deserve to be able to have these conversations with people, even though sometimes we can all struggle a little bit with that, I think is also, it comes across, right? When someone comes and talks to you and they're clearly passionate about what they're doing, or they're really interested in the work that you've done, most people are thrilled to hear it and are already interested in collaborating with you, I find. So doing your research, being prepared, especially when you're going into a bigger setting, and especially if you're feeling a little bit more junior, can sometimes be a good way to navigate some of these spaces and then generate these collaborations thereafter. And I also really loved what you said, which is it's not a one and done. You can't just meet someone for 10 minutes for coffee and then expect that you're going to have a lifelong career collaboration. It actually requires some work and follow up. And I think that that's also part of the like post-meeting planning that can be really valuable.
Yeah. Can I add to that? Because the other thing, and I know this is mainly for people who are 10 years or less outside of training, but I do think this comes up probably around the like 3 to 5 year mark, which is when you're going up for promotions and when you are applying for grants. Both of these processes require demonstrating that you've had a track record of collaboration. And in addition to the intentionality we've been speaking of, one of the things that I found that you could do is if there's somebody that you perhaps may want to work with, but you haven't had the opportunity to work with yet, one thing you could do, and this is just an idea, is if you're writing something that you think complements the work that you're doing and could potentially serve as foundation or preliminary data for a future project, invite that individual to be a collaborator. So if it's a manuscript, then that person can review it and provide their input. If it's analysis of primary data, you can ask them, am I interpreting this accurately? Like, what is your take on this data? Do you think this is the best way to present this information to the general public? There are ways to, and people really respond well to this, right? Because this is not an idea that they necessarily generated, but this is an opportunity they have to inform how this information is disseminated. So you're now connected. They provide their input. Once that publication is out, when you are going up for your next grant or promotion, you need to list the name of this person. You can say, we've collaborated. They know who you are. They know your work ethic because you reached out. They know if you were keeping up with your deadlines. They know the quality of your work. And therefore, anything that they write in support of you is going to be really strong.
That was so smart and so well said, Rachel. Can I just add from a non-heavy researcher standpoint, right? Like I'm mostly an educator. I do some educational scholarship, but I went up as a Clinet person for associate recently. I think it's not yet closed, but maybe by the time it's launched, it'll be closed. Was that I think you gave me the dancing salsa game.
That's because it's coming.
But it was off screen, so that was great. No, but it's so important because obviously also reputation, and you have to show regional and national, and those collaborations extend not just from heavy researchers, but all the way just to clinical educators. And that's such great advice just on that side as well. So I think that's worth noting as well. So we are kind of winding down, which honestly is making me very sad because I'm learning so much from all three of you. But I am wondering if you two could highlight, you said so much already, but maybe one piece of advice that you really give all your mentees that either your mentors gave you and you really just pass it down, or is that really learned advice that you think is just good for people out there that want to develop collaborations, want to kind of step into this world and give it a shot? What do you tell them?
Okay, so this is something that I say kind of cheek and tongue, but I do mean it, which is under promise and over deliver. So most of the time when I'm asked to do something, I always take it back. I don't usually say yes right away to most things. I say, let me think about that and let me get back to you. And I take it back to my office and I just look at what else I've committed myself to and make sure that I have the time and attention to really produce high quality work for whatever that ask may be. And once I've sort of taken all of those different factors into consideration, then I will say yes to that opportunity. And unless it's something that's very time sensitive, let's say if they're asking if it's due in a week or two, which again, this is just an example, nothing should be due in a week or two. But if it's depending on the time frame, I might say, could I maybe have a little bit more time to do it? Because I want to make sure that I do a great job balancing all of my other responsibilities. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to be able to deliver that product in the time in which they requested, but I've already set a precedent that, I'm going to need a little bit more time. So when I return that product within the time in which they originally asked for it, people are really excited because they're like, wow, we did not expect this thing for another 2 weeks, right? And so in general, I think it's better for people to be pleasantly surprised that you did something quicker, better than what they anticipated you to do than to be disappointed because you were late and the product was not of the quality that they were hoping for.
I love that. That's great advice. I feel like that will speak to a lot of us over here.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. I don't know if I'm going to be able to follow it, but I think what I would say is just being the kind of collaborator that you want other people to be with you. Being generous, being thoughtful, being kind when you're reviewer number 1 or number 2, but also trying to be as constructive as you possibly can. We all want the end product to be awesome, but there are really constructive ways to articulate your ideas when you're working in groups as well. And most people respond better to positive or positively targeted feedback. So, I think that's also something that's really important to highlight, that when you bring your enthusiasm and you bring your kindness and you bring your collaboration to the table, people will respond in kind. And that actually makes working in groups, which is a necessity in any part of medicine. It doesn't matter whether you're a researcher, you're a clinician, you're an educator, you're an administrator. It makes that collaboration process so much more pleasant and more fun and more seamless.
Thank you both very much for your time. This has really been wonderful for us. If people want to reach out to you, do both of you have social media or emails that you prefer to be contacted through? You want to shout them out?
People can find me at Issaka MD, Issaka MD on all social media platforms.
And people can find me at Dr. Loren GR on Twitter.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for being here. You guys are the best.
Thank you so much. This was fun. It was great to meet you, Lauren.
Same here.
And it was great to meet you, Catherine.
Yes, you as well.
Thank you for listening to the AGA podcast. To reach us, please email us at agapodcast@gastro.org or follow us on Twitter at MJWhitsonMD, at Nina Nandi MD, and at CSC MD. Podcast production done by Resonant Recordings. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening and have a good one.